remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell, they actually devoted a show. What was it called? The Lives of Fletcher
Yeah, the
Pratt?
Lives of Fletcher Prouty. What a
Right.
joke.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment. I mean, those.
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Hells yeah. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Big Bad Bob, otherwise known as Rob Clark, and this is the Lone Gunman Podcast, episode number 255. Before we get into the show today, let us hear a word from our most delicious of sponsors, Silk City, baby. Silk City Hot Sauce. Bob, take it away. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Patterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. And thank you, Bob, for that most delicious update. And yes, you too can enjoy some delicious hot sauce and help to support the show at the same time. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and in the area at checkout, enter the code GUNMAN. That's GUNMAN. For 20% off of your entire order, folks. You can't beat it. You can't beat the heat. See, you thought I was going to say something else, didn't you? You can't beat their heat. That ought to be their slogan. Maybe I'll recommend that, and maybe they'll pay me for that. Who knows? But anyway, before we get started with the show, we've got a really interesting one here for you today. But before we get into it, I want to reiterate that your boy, Big Bad Bob, and my humble, devoted secret weapon sidekick, Joe Borelli, will be presenting this year at Lancer virtually. So if you have not secured your tickets or traveled to Dallas or signed up at assassinationconference.com for the virtual feed, head over to jfklancerproductions.com to secure your tickets and all that good stuff. There's a big, exciting, fun-filled, packed, informative weekend waiting for you at the 27th annual JFK Lancer November in Dallas conference this year. It is the 60th anniversary of the death of John F. Kennedy. And believe me when I tell you, this is going to be one that you're not going to want to miss. As I said, it is jammy packed. It's at the Lorenzo Hotel in Dallas if you're going to be going there in person. If you can't get to Dallas, head to assassinationconference.com for the virtual presentation. And for registration, visit JFK Lancer Publications for registration details and ticket options. It starts on November 17th, folks, and through the 19th. So make your plans now. It will be here before you know it. Also, I wanted to remind everyone about my buddy Jason's 60th anniversary commemorative edition Lego art set of our 35th president, John F. Kennedy. Now, there are 2 iconic portrait options to choose from, available in a white or black frame that would look awesome hanging on your wall. Definitely a conversation piece. There's the visionary, the man who stood for a strong, peaceful nation, and the hopeful, the father to a country with dreams to last generations. There's more than 3,400 pieces to this Lego set, so it is definitely a challenging put together, but you will have fun doing it. The finished portrait is 15 3/4 inches wide by 20 inches and 3/4 tall. So this is definitely something that will look hella cool hanging on your wall. And if you're interested, please feel free to email Jason at 2bn.ca for more details and to order yours today. As an added bonus, order by October 10th. Well, shit, we're past that. For free delivery to those attending the Lancer Convention in Dallas in November. Maybe it's not too late. Reach out to Jason. The artist is Jason Seelman. And help him fund his trip to Dallas by getting yourself an amazing Lego set that you will not forget. It's definitely an awesome commemorative edition for the 60th anniversary. All right, without further ado, croissant, let's get right into the show, shall we? So, the name of this show is Jerry, Jack, and Julia. And we're going to be going through some things that I happened to come across that I thought would make for some good banter for the show. The first thing is an October 11th, 1976 letter to Mr. Rick Feeney, Office of the Honorable Thomas N. Downing, U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. And this is from researcher Jerry Policoff. Dear Rick, following, per your request, are some of my thoughts as to how the Select Committee investigating the Kennedy assassination should proceed. Okay, so this is, as they're feeling out and getting ready to form the House Select Committee on Assassinations, they were asking for suggestions on what they should be looking for, or what they should be looking at, or what they should be looking into. So I came across this pretty cool letter from Jerry Policoff, sorry. And we're going to go through his letter here to Mr. Rick Feeney, Office of the Honorable Thomas N. Downing, U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C. Number 1. Regarding the medical evidence, I would caution that extreme care is necessary. As I have suggested earlier, I would strongly suggest consultation with Howard Rothman on this subject because of his extraordinary research into this area. Harold Weisberg's knowledge is also exceptional in this area. Specific questions should include: A. Why were so few people who had seen the president's body called as witnesses? And why were some who were called not specifically questioned in this area? In view of the ambiguity as to the location of the back wound, an effort should now be made to find and question everyone who saw the body, and also to determine if they were ever questioned during the life of the Warren Commission. That is a good idea. I also like his suggestion about Howard Rothman, who is a very underrated author, and I really enjoyed his book. And of course, that was written back in the 70s, and it still holds up well to this day. B, at the Clay Shaw trial, Colonel Pierre Fink, one of the autopsy surgeons, conceded under cross-examination that military brass took charge of the autopsy and prevented dissection of the back wound to determine the path of the bullet. Why and who were these individuals? That's a very good question, Jerry, and one that I would like to know the answer to. The likely answer is because the back wound did not traverse the body. It did not match up to the neck wound. That would be my guess. C, under whose direction did Commander Humes destroy his autopsy notes? Well, apparently he took it upon himself to do so, at least according to him. D, why were ambiguous non-fixed points used as measuring points in the autopsy report? In contrast, the long-suppressed Berkeley death certificate uses 2 fixed points: the spinal column and the third thoracic vertebrae, resulting, incidentally, in a location significantly lower than that found in the autopsy report and the testimony of the doctors, which is a problem, folks. E, what has been the chain of possession of the autopsy material? Who has had access and under what circumstances? Again, a very good point and something that needs to be established. F, executive session transcripts of the Warren Commission refer to the commission having seen at least some of the autopsy photos. A photo of the back wound is said to show it below the shoulder. There is other evidence to support this inference that this material was in fact seen by at least part of the commission. Why was this fact suppressed, and why do current descriptions of the material refer to only one photograph of the back wound, in which its location is ambiguous because of the position of the body and the placement of a ruler on top of the spinal column? Again, more good questions. G, why are there now no x-rays of the extremities when full body x-rays are reported to have been taken? H, why do concurrent examinations of the autopsy material locate the head wound some 4 inches higher than its location in the original autopsy report? Another interesting question. Why do fragments now appear in the throat when the autopsy doctors swore there were no such fragments? Assuming the authenticity of the autopsy material and in view of the near pristine condition of CE 399, what does the existence of these additional fragments do to the continued viability of the single bullet theory? J, are the wounds not only consistent with all shots coming from behind, but also consistent with having resulted from the type of rifle and the type of ammunition alleged to have caused them? K, where are the apparently missing photographs known to have been taken of the chest cavity? Section 2. All major evidentiary tests undertaken by and for the Warren Commission should be redone. This would apply particularly to the neutron activation analysis. 3. Exculpatory evidence on Oswald should be considered thoroughly. The Warren Commission began with an assumption that Oswald was guilty and dismissed such evidence out of hand. Agreed. Section 4. The committee should investigate evidence that there is an ongoing campaign being waged to point the finger at Castro. Those connected with these allegations have curious interrelationships. A, Jack Anderson. Associates and sources include Edward P. Morgan, Frank Sturgis, and Hank Greenspun. Anderson owns a piece of Greenspun's newspaper, the Las Vegas Sun. B, Edward P. Morgan, who was a lawyer for Howard Hughes, Hank Greenspun, and Johnny Roselli, negotiated the sale of the Desert Inn from Mo Dallitz to Howard Hughes. Initial contact in the deal was Greenspun, who received a part of Morgan's finder's fee. Morgan was Anderson's source on the Castro stories and Dallas has connections with Eugene Brady, arrested in Dealey Plaza on the day of the assassination. C. Hank Greenspun, close friend of Mayhew, Anderson, and Morgan, had close ties to Hughes, which ended at the same time Mayhew's did. Performed public relations for Dallas's Flamingo Club. D. Frank Sturgis, a friend of Anderson since the Bay of Pigs, investigated by the Warren Commission in '64 because of his leaks to the Miami Herald implicating Castro in the assassination, has had organized crime connections. E. Lonnie Hudkins, reporter involved in implicating connections between Oswald and the FBI and Castro in the assassination. Allegedly was involved in a planned CIA contract assassination aimed at Chetty Jagan. Had pre-assassination ties to the Dallas White Russian community with which Oswald associated. Section 5. Some method should be found by which staff will be able to take sworn depositions if all the crucial testimony is to be taken as it should be under oath. Section 6. Beware of disinformation. Example, Hugh McDonald. Be prepared for a flood of trivia from the FBI and CIA. I hope the foregoing is of some help. If you have any questions, I am at your disposal and will do anything I can to be of assistance to you. Sincerely, Jerry Policoff. So I think Jerry did a good job there, feeding them a little information about what they should be looking for and what they should focus on in the assassination investigation. Now, a year later, Jerry wrote to the Honorable Chris Dodd of the United States House of Representatives, and this was in April of 1977. He says, "Dear Congressman Dodd, because I am covering the House investigation for New Times, I have done my best up until now to divorce my role as a student of the Kennedy assassination from my present role as a journalist. However, after receiving a copy of the accidentally released March 17th executive session transcript from another friend in the media, I find myself unable to ignore a section of this transcript which was largely glossed over by most of the press because of their lack of understanding of the basic facts of the case. I am referring to the briefing given the committee by Robert Tannenbaum regarding leads currently being pursued by the staff. Mr. Dodd, I must be frank in telling you that I was appalled to find that in his 7 months with the committee, Mr. Tannenbaum has apparently learned next to nothing about the case and takes seriously several leads that are dismissed as nonsense or disinformation by most, if not all, of the more knowledgeable critics. If this is allowed to go uncorrected, the end result will be an investigation that will make the Garrison probe shine by comparison. What troubles me the most is the suspicion that what is revealed in the transcript is but the tip of the iceberg. If this is the material Tannenbaum feels is credible enough to present to the committee, I shudder to think about what he is holding back. Specifically, I was struck by the following. Tannenbaum begins his presentation with a description of a new witness who states that she was introduced to Lee Oswald of the CIA by Jack Ruby. This witness also claims to have taken a film of the assassination, which was later confiscated by 2 agents, one from the FBI and the other from the CIA. I believe you have already received a letter on this witness from Paul Hock as a result of the inclusion of her tale in the most recent committee report. Her real name is Beverly Oliver, and I first heard her story over 2 years ago from Richard Sprague. I doubted its veracity then, and I doubt it even more now since significant aspects of her story have changed. This witness, who claims to be the elusive Babushka lady, an unidentified woman who appears to be holding a movie camera and appears in several photographs of Dealey Plaza taken during the assassination, is written up in books by Penn Jones Jr. and Gary Shaw. Shaw states further that she was also present at a meeting between Jack Ruby and Richard Nixon. This woman's tale is so wild that I am amazed that it is given any amount of credibility by the committee. To begin with, she claims that she did not know what CIA stood for when she was introduced to Oswald. I find it almost inconceivable that anyone would remember 3 random letters if they held no meaning to that person. Her story about the visit by an FBI man and a CIA man is equally unbelievable in view of the rivalry between the two organizations. In fact, when Mrs. Oliver originally recounted her story a few years back, she said the visitors were Texas Rangers. And her only testimony regarding Oswald was that she thought she might have seen him once with Ruby at the Carousel Club. Examination of the Dealey Plaza photographs reveals a babushka lady that appears to be somewhat heavy-set and middle-aged. Mrs. Oliver was a stunning young lady of about 17 years old, with a statuesque figure at the time. Tannenbaum's excitement at the testimony of the Parkland Hospital head nurse reveals a lack of understanding of some of the most basic aspects of the case. The fragments referred to by Nurse Audrey Bell seem to be the same ones referred to in the Warren report. The FBI acknowledged possession of 3 small fragments which were taken from the governor's wrist. Certainly Tannenbaum should have researched this point before jumping to the conclusions implicit in his briefing. To be sure, the single bullet theory cannot stand extensive scrutiny, and there is certainly evidence of too many fragments with too much cumulative weight, but one need only gain knowledge of the old evidence to demonstrate this fact. In describing Connolly's wounds, Tannenbaum reveals that he doesn't even know where they are. He seems to be describing 4 torso wounds while missing the wrist altogether. Though it seems ambiguous from his language, it appears conceivable that Tannenbaum is not even aware that the magic bullet was not found in Connolly, but rather was discovered by an orderly after it rolled out from under a stretcher presumed by the Warren Commission to have been Connolly's. I do not know what the committee thinks about the story told by Willem Altmans regarding George de Mohrenschildt, but there are aspects of it that defy credibility from the outset, none of which seem to have occurred to Tannenbaum. The biggest problem is the fact that it seems unlikely that Oswald and de Mohrenschildt ever saw each other after April 15, 1963, when he and his wife Jean paid the Oswalds a visit. Shortly thereafter, Oswald left for New Orleans and de Mohrenschildt for Haiti. Another problem is that de Mohrenschildt doesn't seem to have ever mentioned the name of H.L. Hunt until 3 weeks after the Dallas Morning News first ran the story about the note allegedly written by Oswald to a, quote, Mr. Hunt. It seems unlikely that de Mohrenschildt could have been middleman in a conspiracy while physically separated from the alleged assassin by so many miles. Furthermore, de Mohrenschildt's protestations after the assassination that Oswald must have been a patsy seem out of character for the person who supposedly put the rifle in his hand. From a strictly personal point of view, I find myself wary of any conspiracy that places Oswald in the depository as one of the assassins. I feel that the evidence incontestably proves that Oswald never fired a shot. In describing the arrest of Eugene Hale Brading, Tannenbaum states that a shot fired from the Dow Tex building is consistent with a bullet that struck a curbstone on the south side of Elm Street. This is a theory that Richard Sprague, which to my knowledge has never been scientifically substantiated. It could well be that this is the case, but it should be treated as no more than a hypothesis until the probability of such a trajectory can be scientifically determined. I am likewise disturbed by Tannenbaum's inferences regarding connections with Shaw and Ferry. I know of no evidence that satisfactorily establishes that either man participated in a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. There is a big difference between establishing some connections between these persons and Oswald and establishing their participation in such a plot. Certainly this too should be explored, but Tannenbaum's briefing seemed to me to imply an assumption of guilt. Again, I detect the influence of Richard Sprague, who is a vocal apologist for Garrison, and implies that Garrison proved his case and failed to obtain a conviction only because the jury was gotten to. Tannenbaum also errs in recounting testimony placing Shaw, Oswald, and Ferry together in Clinton, Louisiana, in the company of anti-Castro groups. There was persuasive testimony placing the trio together in Clinton, but there was no testimony linking them to anti-Castro groups there. The occasion of the alleged event was a voter registration drive. Finally, Tannenbaum discusses a doctor who was a resident at Parkland Hospital on the day of the assassination basing his comments not upon first-hand testimony, but rather on the second-hand assertions of a friend who, quote, has come forward and told us about this, unquote. This resident appears to contest the official description of the wounds as described by the Warren Commission. Quoting Tannenbaum, it was his impression that an entry wound on the governor's body. There was an entry wound on the governor's body. This is the first I have heard that all of Connolly's wounds were exit wounds. Evidently, the assassins were hidden inside Connolly's abdomen. Obviously, Tannenbaum is confused and means to say something other than what he said, but the very idea of relying upon this type of secondhand testimony when the committee has merely to order a physical examination of Connolly strikes me as imbecilic. It seems unlikely that Connolly's wounds are other than represented by his physicians. Kennedy's wounds are, of course, quite another matter entirely. Tannenbaum repeats the second-hand assertions that the resident attempted to examine the president's wounds and was rebuffed, which, by his experience, he deemed to be quite unusual. Just how often in this resident's experience did he attempt to examine the remains of a dead president of the United States? Mr. Dodd, what really disturbs me about all the above is that Mr. Tannenbaum, whom I am pleased at least seems to be convinced that there was a conspiracy, seems to be relying on the expertise of Richard Sprague and is ignoring several scholarly experts whom he is going to have to consult if he is to conduct a meaningful investigation. Sprague has done a masterful job of collecting and collating photographic evidence relevant to the Kennedy assassination. He is a friend of mine, and I like him a great deal. When it comes to theories about the assassination, however, Sprague is prone toward the wildest of fantasies. By no stretch of the imagination can he be called a true scholar with regard to the minutiae of the case. People like Paul Hock and Peter Dale Scott of Berkeley, Howard Rothman of Gainesville, Mary Farrell of Dallas, Mark Allen of Washington, and a few others who do possess this scholarship have been virtually ignored by the committee. At one point, the committee went so far as to send out form letters to the critics requesting relevant photographs and documents. I understand that controversy will arise from extensive dealings with the critics, but the alternative is an investigation that, without their considerable experience and expertise, will inevitably lead down blind alleys and false trails, and in the end will produce nothing except more questions for future historians to ponder. Can you even imagine any other subject where it would be considered controversial for a congressional investigation to consult experts regarding the subject under investigation? Thank you for taking the time to read this letter. I am also enclosing for your information a memorandum prepared by me last year at the request of committee staff regarding how the committee should proceed. Sincerely yours, Jerry Policoff. You know, he brings up some good points there. When it comes to wanting to get respected critics involved in the investigation, you know, to kind of help steer the investigation. Because when you leave it up to people who aren't familiar with the case, things get a little wacky. Which I think the HSCA did a fairly decent job in their investigation. They went down a lot of rabbit holes and extracted a lot of never before heard information from never before talked to witnesses. Could they have done a better job? Sure. You know, hindsight's 20/20. But you know, in the end, at least Jerry Policoff got his wish, and Tannenbaum was ousted, and they brought Blakey in, which I don't know how much better he was. But, you know, it is what it is. All right, next up, we have a letter from Jack Peebles. And again, this is from 1976, and it is also to Representative Thomas Downing of the Select Committee on Assassinations. Dear Representative Downing. Now, Jack Peebles was an attorney at law in New Orleans. Okay. Dear Representative Downing, I represent a client in the New Orleans area who may have information relevant to the inquiries of the Select Committee on Assassinations. My client is a professional person who holds a PhD degree in the biological sciences and is currently teaching and doing research in the field. She advises that during April of 1963, she became acquainted with one Jose A. Rivera in Washington, D.C., who at the time was connected to the National Institute of Health as an administrator. My client believes that Mr. Rivera may have had some connection with research activities of the Central Intelligence Agency and may have conducted unauthorized experiments on her with drugs during the spring of 1963. More interesting, she further advises that at the time, the same Mr. Rivera gave her a message to give to Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans upon her return. And in fact, she did telephone a number provided by Mr. Rivera and spoke to someone who identified himself as Lee Harvey Oswald. She further advises that she gave this information to the government immediately after the assassination of President Kennedy, but no further inquiries were made of her. She has recently written the CIA and FBI and requested information under the Freedom of Information Act, and these agencies have replied that they have absolutely no records of significance concerning her. My client would like to provide you with any information she can if you feel that it may be helpful to your investigation. She realizes that she cannot produce independent verification for much of what she states, and she does not want to be embarrassed by having her name appear in your public records as having been a person who makes sensational allegations. Therefore, she has asked me to communicate with you and see if arrangements can be made so that if she does provide a statement to you, the statement will remain confidential and her identity will remain confidential unless your investigation produces independent verification of her statements. Only in that event would she be willing to have her identity revealed. I am not personally acquainted with this client, but I can assure you that she has produced sufficient evidence to me to establish her identity, the identity of Mr. Rivera, and I have noticed no contradictions or behavior on her part which would cause me to dismiss her statement out of hand. If you wish to inquire further into this matter, let me know. Thank you for your attention to the above. Yours truly, Jack Peebles. So, we have a mystery woman who apparently was dosed with something, probably LSD, and had things done to her by Jose Rivera. So, is this some kind of weird payback in a roundabout kind of way? Or was this something that actually happened? Did Rivera tell her to contact Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans and give him a message? Well, what was the message? That's what I'd like to know. What the hell was the message? I don't know if they further investigated this allegation or not, but it's very interesting. Very interesting. And just like that, folks, through the magic of the pause button and a little bit of Googling, I've got the rest of the story. So, and it's a wild one. So apparently in 1991, a woman by the name of Adele Edison made her story public in the Third Decade, published by Jerry Rose. And it was called From April to November and Back Again. And to protect her identity, it was published under the byline of K.S. Turner in the November 1991 edition of the bi-monthly journal. So, we know what she claimed. Now, remember, the letter I read to you was from 1976. All right, this is 15 years later. Okay, so either this woman, Adele Edison, is batshit crazy and has been holding on to this story for all these years and still going with it, despite the fact that I guess the HSCA didn't really look into it any further than that. But again, she's regurgitating the same thing 15 years later, and now it has perked the interest of some assassination researchers. So let's see what she had to say 15 years later. It says there are, however, few official documented reports on the matter, although some are forthcoming in response to the JFK Assassination Records Review Act. But Adele Edison's story can be independently confirmed in many respects without official documentation, and subsequent inquiries by Dick Russell, Larry Hapanen, John Gooch, and myself, I'm reading from a Bill Kelly article, have confirmed much of what she has to say. And at this point, the lack of documentation seems to make what she has to say even more significant. It is a story that provides numerous leads that should be pursued. Edison's article in the third decade describes how she came to meet Dr. Jose Rivera at a medical conference in Atlantic City, New Jersey in April of 1963. She and Rivera were both medical professionals, Edison in her third year of a Tulane University School of Medicine postdoctoral fellowship in conjunction with the National Institute of Health's Institute of Neurological Diseases and Blindness. She had previously worked on the faculty of Rockefeller University, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and St. Mary's Dominican College and Delgado Community College in New Orleans. When she met him, Dr. Rivera was manning a booth at the Atlantic City Medical Convention. Upon learning that Edison was with Tulane in New Orleans, Rivera said he had been on the faculty of the biochemistry department at Loyola, which is also in New Orleans, and that he was currently living in D.C. At the time of their meeting, Edison described Rivera as approximately 45 or 50 years of age, about 5'3" or 4 inches in height, and obese. Sounds like a looker. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with some gray. He was balding at the forehead and crown. His eyes were brown, and he wore corrective glasses with very thick lenses, which greatly magnified the size of his eyes. Oh boy, what a handsome fellow. His complexion was quite dark, and he spoke English with a distinct Hispanic accent. The Atlantic City Convention Authority records reflect that the NIH sponsored a high blood pressure symposium at the Atlantic City Convention Hall in April of '63. Edison testified before the ARRB in Dallas on November 18, 1994, that the meetings in Atlantic City were organized by the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology, an umbrella group of 6 major biological societies, including the American Physiological Society, for which Edison gave a report on her research. The strictly professional conversation between Edison and Rivera became friendly, or as Edison explained it, I befriended him or he befriended me. The NIH was their first common tie, with their mutual professional acquaintances in New Orleans providing additional associations. It turned out that he had taught at Loyola, and we knew some people in common who were, for example, Dr. Fred Brazda, who was chairman of biochemistry now at LSU Medical School, and a few other people. I was planning to go to Bethesda in Washington and visit with colleagues and friends at NIH and also see the NIH, Edison later testified. And so he had, in the course of our conversations and so on, invited me to his home to have dinner with him and his wife and daughter, and also to help me obtain hotel or motel space for my visit in Bethesda after these meetings, and to give me a sightseeing tour and so on. So Edison arrived in D.C. on Monday, April 22, 1963. As Rivera had requested, she telephoned him at his office, and his secretary arranged for her accommodations at a Bethesda, Maryland motel. Rivera picked up Edison in his car and explained that his wife, who was a nurse, had been called into duty at a hospital. So the two of them had dinner at a Washington restaurant called Blackie's House of Beef. It was while standing in line, waiting to be seated, Edison recalled, when Dr. Rivera began to talk of his travels in conjunction with his work, and he spoke of Dallas, Texas. Edison quoted Rivera as saying, "When you go to Dallas, you should go to the Carousel Club because it's a very nice nightclub." Edison made a mental note of a merry-go-round while Rivera asked her if she knew Lee Harvey Oswald. He told her that Oswald had lived in the Soviet Union, was married to a Russian, had a child, and they were planning on moving to New Orleans, where Edison was then living. She distinctly made a mental impression of the name. I vaguely wondered if he was related to a boy I'd gone to high school with, whose name was Fred Oswald. Rivera encouraged Edison to meet the Oswalds, saying that you should get to know them. She assumed that Oswald was a fellow medical research scientist. Well, he was about as far away from that as you can get, Adele. Edison and Rivera then made plans to meet the next night when she would get a sightseeing tour and could have dinner with Rivera at his home with his wife and daughter. After, spending a day with friends, Edison was picked up by Rivera at her motel, where a tall, sharp-faced man hailed Rivera and addressed him as Colonel. They spoke for quite a long while about their times together in an army base. His friend spoke of his current work in the Army on telemetry and some work with cameras and telephoto lenses. Rivera later told Edison that we're photographing demonstrators with telephoto cameras from rooftops. We'll identify individual demonstrators and put their names in computer files. We've already started this on the West Coast. Edison wondered how that could be related to his work as a science administrator at NINDB until Rivera told her of his other office on the Hill and ties with, quote, Foggy Bottom, which Edison thought to be a residential section of the city. According to Edison, after a lengthy drive to view the cherry trees, the National Library of Congress, Walter Reed Army Institute and Hospital, the Capitol Building, Georgetown, and other sites, we started to approach the White House. While they passed the White House a number of times, the first time they went by, Rivera asked Edison, "I wonder what Jackie will do when her husband dies." After a pause and Edison's incredulous "what?" Rivera said, "Oh, I meant the baby. She might lose the baby." Edison didn't even know Jackie was pregnant at the time. That was the first inkling I had that Rivera might be implying something sinister concerning President Kennedy. Then, every time we toured around the White House, he asked me if I saw Caroline on her pony Macaroni and all kinds of crazy nonsense, and I was beginning to think that I was with an absolute madman. Rivera's part of the conversation at times was difficult to follow, but many of his statements, such as the reference to Jackie, seemed deliberately placed. When he spoke of President Kennedy, Rivera was extremely critical of Kennedy's position on civil rights. Rivera made many disparaging remarks about black people and the civil rights movement. Rivera also mentioned the NIH. Edison remembers several times during the course of this evening and the previous one, Rivera referred to the NIH being called the reservation because there were so many chiefs and no Indians. I wondered why he had to repeat this so many times. Edison, as a professional research scientist, suspected Rivera was using hypnotic suggestion techniques on her and possibly even drugs. He spoke of hypnosis. He had knowledge of hypnotic techniques and the uses of LSD. Ding, ding, ding. A psychomimetic and hypnagogic drug which increases susceptibility to suggestions without causing amnesia. Since his wife again was called in to work at the hospital, Rivera and Edison had dinner at the Twin Bridges at the Marriott Motor Hotel across the Potomac River. While the dinner was relatively uneventful, Rivera did ask Edison some strange questions, like if she knew a lawyer named John Apt. After we finished eating, he asked me to do a favor for him when I arrived home. Rivera wanted Edison to contact Winston de Montseber, a Loyola faculty member who was leaving New Orleans. Edison wrote a note to herself, Winston de Montseber called Dr. Rivera when leaving New Orleans. Then Rivera said to also call Lee Harvey Oswald at 899-4244. Write down this name, Lee Harvey Oswald. And here's the message, folks. Tell him to kill the chief. Rivera then contradicted himself, saying, No, don't write that down. You'll remember it when you get to New Orleans. We're just playing a little joke on him. Edison said that she still assumed the joke would be on Oswald, whom she thought was a scientist and friend of Rivera's. She thought the chief was a reference to Elizabeth Hartman, the chief of the grants and awards section of the NIH, whom Rivera had earlier joked about as being like the chief of a reservation with too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Edison remembers Rivera then being agitated and excited. He began talking strangely about it happening and drew a diagram on a napkin, almost incoherent and very agitated. Quote, "It will be on the 5th floor. There'll be some men up there," he said. Edison, quoting Rivera, is saying nonsensical things like, "Oswald was not what he seems. We're going to send him to the library to read about great assassinations in history. After it's over, he'll call Apt to defend him. After it happens, the president's best friend will commit suicide. He'll jump out of a window because of his grief. It will happen after the Shriners Circus comes to New Orleans. After it's over, the men will be out of the country. Remember, the first time it happens won't be real." Edison recalls he did not respond to any of my questions about what was to happen, and I became even more concerned and suspicious about his odd behavior and statements. As I entered his car, he asked me to destroy the note that I had made and to forget what had just happened. It did not dawn on me that he could have been referring to an assassination of the president, the chief. Rivera threatened Edison about going to the FBI, saying, "They'll want that note. Don't give it to them. I don't want to have to hurt you. We'll be watching you," Edison said. I became very frightened. I didn't even understand what he was talking about, even though he had made references to the assassination of the president. About a week after Adele returned home to New Orleans, around May 1st, 1963, she called the 899-4244 number Rivera had given her from Lee Harvey Oswald, whom she believed was a research scientist, colleague of Dr. Rivera's, who had returned from Russia with a Russian wife and recently moved to New Orleans. A man who answered the phone said there was nobody there by that name. So a week later, approximately May 9th to the 12th, I dialed again, thinking I might have misdialed the first time. The same man answered and seemed surprised when she asked for Oswald, as he said, "Well, they've just arrived." Although Oswald wasn't there, Edison spoke with his wife briefly, and although she spoke with a Russian accent, Marina seemed to understand the conversation, didn't know Dr. Rivera, and said it was okay for Edison to call back when her husband was there. The third time she called, the phone was answered by the same man, whom Edison believes was the landlord. Oswald came to the phone, but denied knowing Dr. Jose Rivera of Washington, D.C. That's strange because he apparently knows you and your wife and your phone number. Edison told him. I then asked Oswald for the location of the telephone, and he courteously gave me an address on Magazine Street, which I placed to be somewhere near the 500 block, or 5000 block, sorry. I thanked him and apologized for bothering him, still thinking that he was a scientist. I wondered why a scientist would be living in a rather run-down part of the city. Needless to say, I did not deliver Rivera's message to kill the chief to Oswald. What is really strange is that Dr. or Colonel Jose Rivera in D.C. knew Oswald's New Orleans telephone number on Tuesday, April 23rd, before Oswald himself knew where he was moving to in New Orleans. It was the following day, on Wednesday, April 24th, when Ruth Payne drove from Irving to the Oswald's Neely Street apartment in Dallas to find the Oswalds all packed and ready to move to New Orleans. They had quite suddenly, Marina later said it was because of the Walker shooting incident, decided to move to New Orleans, where Oswald was born. They asked Ruth Payne for a ride to the bus station, and she was startled by this sudden decision. Ruth Payne discussed the matter with them in the car on the way to the bus station and convinced them that because they didn't know where Oswald would work or where they were going to stay, Marina and their daughter should just stay with her in Irving, and Oswald went on alone to New Orleans to find a job and locate an apartment. Oswald arrived in New Orleans by bus and called his Aunt Lillian Moret to announce that he had returned home and to ask if he could stay with them at 757 French Street while he looked for work. Mrs. Moret was surprised, but agreed to take Oswald on as a guest until he obtained a job and apartment. After filing for unemployment compensation extensions for his work in Dallas at Jaggers Child Stovall, which required cross-state approvals, Oswald applied for work at a number of locations, including the William B. Riley Coffee Company at 640 Magazine Street, where he listed 3 references: his uncle, John Moret, a Sergeant Robert Hydell, and Lieutenant J. Evans, the last 2 of which the Warren Report claimed are apparently fictitious names. But they're not fictitious. Oswald did know a Hydell in the Marines, who was living in New Orleans at the time, and there was indeed a J. Evans, because as the report notes on the same page, also on May 9th, Oswald obtained an apartment at 4905-07 Magazine Street with the help of Myrtle Evans, who had known him when he was a child, and Myrtle had a husband named Julian. When he was young, Oswald's mother had rented an apartment from Myrtle and Julian Evans. After the assassination, Myrtle Evans characterized Oswald as a spoiled brat to the Warren Commission and Marina's biographer Priscilla Johnson McMillan. Myrtle also helped Oswald find the Magazine Street apartment in the same coincidental way that Ruth Payne found Oswald a job at the Schoolbook Depository. Recreating Oswald's reintroduction into his old neighborhood, Lee went to their building, and Julian Evans, who was seated at breakfast drinking his last cup of coffee, recognized him right away. He had known Lee both as a child and as a teenager, and there was something about him that neither he nor Myrtle liked. Julian finished his coffee, shook hands with the caller, and left for work. His wife Myrtle, a heavy-set woman in her 50s who wore glasses, had red hair, in a bun, peeped at Lee closely. "I know you, don't I?" "Sure, I am Lee Oswald. I was just waiting to see when you were going to recognize me." Myrtle and Julian thought Oswald was still in Russia. Even though there was something she didn't like about Oswald, Myrtle took Oswald to lunch and helped him find the apartment on Magazine Street. According to Priscilla Johnson McMillan, however, she drove Oswald around in her car looking for for rent signs until they found one on Magazine Street. Lee spotted one and they went in. There were 2 apartments for rent at 4907 Magazine Street, and the bigger one looked as if it might do. It was on the ground floor. It had a long living room, a screened-in porch, a yard, and the kind of iron fence that children can't crawl through. The rent was $65 a month. Myrtle advised Lee that it was the best value for his money and he'd better take it. The landlady was Mrs. Jessie Garner, who lived with her husband in an apartment next door in the same building complex. Oswald told Mrs. Garner that he worked for the Leon Israel Company at 300 Magazine Street when he actually had obtained a job that morning at the William Riley Coffee Company on the same street. It was Jessie Garner who most likely answered the telephone 3 times that Adele Edison called at the request of Dr. Jose Rivera. So, I mean, it just goes on, but that, you get the gist of it. And feel free, folks, to look at September 99, an article by Bill Kelly called A New Oswald Witness Goes Public about Adele Edison. So was Adele Edison full of shit? Or was she legit? If we didn't have this correspondence from 1976 trying to get her story to the House Select Committee on Assassinations to be investigated, I would most likely go with the former rather than the latter. But since we have that, and many of the contemporary JFK researchers were able to corroborate a lot of her story, it's interesting. But again, what does it mean? I have no earthly idea. And that all spawned from a letter from Jack to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Now, let's get to Julia. Right. Julia. On the morning of the president's assassination, in the vicinity of 11 o'clock, I was driving west on Elm Street towards the Triple Underpass. There was a green pickup truck parked on the right-hand side of the road with 2 right wheels up on the curb. I was delayed by traffic congestion long enough to observe a man remove from the back of the truck a rifle wrapped in paper. Because of the delay caused by traffic, I happened to see the face of the driver of the truck quite clearly. While I was stopped there, he looked at me twice. This man was, as I later recognized from his pictures, Jack Ruby. The next morning, FBI agents showed me photographs. This was on Saturday, the day after the assassination and the day before Ruby shot Oswald. The FBI then showed me some photographs to choose from. One of the men I picked out was Jack Ruby. When one of the FBI agents turned the picture over, I saw Ruby's name on the back. At the same time, I also picked out possibilities, 3 other men who were of the same type with regard to facial features. This was on Saturday morning, the day before Ruby went to the police station and shot Oswald. The next morning, I was looking at television with my family when I saw Ruby shoot Oswald. I said, that was the man I saw in the truck. From the view the television screen gave of Ruby, especially when they showed it again slowly, I recognized him as the man who was at the wheel of the truck on Friday and as the man whose picture the FBI showed me on Saturday. I know just recently, sorry, part of this copy is, I have just recently read a report dated 11/25/63, which refers to my being shown a photograph of Ruby. It says that, quote, I could not identify him as the person. This is not an accurate statement because I did pick out Ruby's picture. Also, this report does not mention the fact that they showed me Ruby's picture on November the 23rd, not the 25th, the day before he shot Oswald. I have also been shown a separate FBI report dated 11/23/63, which is the day they showed me Ruby's picture. This report states, quote, she advised that there was a man sitting under the wheel of the car, slouched over the wheel. This man was wearing a green jacket and described as a white man who appeared to be about 40 to 45 years of age and to be of heavy build. This report then goes on to say of the second man, the one who got the gun out of the back of the truck, that I could identify that second man if I saw him. However, I did not indicate that to the FBI at this time, that I only felt able to identify the man with the gun and not the driver. Contrary to this indication, I had no doubts about what the driver's face looked like. This was on the same day they showed me Ruby's picture, among others, and the day when I picked him in 3 similar pictures as looking like the driver of the truck. I do not know whether the other 3 pictures shown me were other men who looked like Ruby or whether they were 3 other pictures of Jack Ruby. But they definitely showed me Jack Ruby, and I definitely picked him out as looking like the driver. Also, this FBI report dated 11/23/63 has me describing the green pickup truck as having a sign painted on the door. It reads, on the driver's door, the words air conditioning printed in black letters, and the words formed a half-moon shape. This is not true. Every time I was interviewed, and at least 2 of the interviews were by the FBI, I stated that there was no sign of any kind on the side of the truck. The words air conditioning were not painted on the truck, nor were any other words. It was a plain green truck without any printing on it, and I made this clear from the outset. The same thing was done to another purported statement which had been printed up as my, quote, affidavit with the heading Sheriff's Department, County of Dallas. That affidavit is also described on the bottom of the copy I have just seen as Decker Exhibit 5323. Neither of the signatures on the 2 pages of this affidavit are mine, although they are fairly close imitations, except for the way the capital A is written in my second name, Ann. I have always used a pointed capital A, and whoever signed my name on these 2 pages used a round capital A each time. Also, I note that a woman has signed her name as a notary public and has indicated that this alleged statement was sworn to and subscribed before her. This is also untrue. On no occasion during any of my questioning was a woman ever present. Like the FBI statement, the affidavit of the Dallas Sheriff's Department also has me saying that the truck had air conditioning painted on the side in black oval letters. This is not true. There were no letters painted on it whatsoever. That affidavit also has me stating with regard to the driver that, quote, I could not see him too clearly. That is not true. I saw the driver very clearly. I looked right in his face, and he looked at me twice. It was Jack Ruby, and I was not asked to testify before the Warren Commission. Julia Ann Mercer. Now, this was an affidavit that she wrote and signed for the Garrison investigation on January the 6th, 1968, which is interesting, folks. It's interesting. So, there's more evidence of if she's being truthful here of the FBI and sheriff's office altering her testimony for what reason, I don't know. And again, interesting that she was not called before the Warren Commission, and she was labeled a nut job. And one last little thing here that I came across and found, and I wish that I could show you a picture of it because, that would do it a lot more justice. But I came across a photograph, or not photograph, but a mimeographed copy. Somehow the Garrison investigation received on September 18th, 1967, and it is a library card. In the name, or it's from the New Orleans Public Library in New Orleans, of course. And this is what it says on it. Present this card each time you borrow a book. You are responsible for books borrowed on this card. And at the very top, it says it's an adult borrower's card. Name, Clem Bertrand. Address, 3100 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70125. Telephone, 895-6735. Business telephone, 525-8209. Business, International Trade Mart. Business address, at the foot of Canal Street. Signature, Clem Bertrand. And on the back it says, I hereby agree to the following: to be responsible for the return of the library all materials borrowed through the use of this card, and to pay all library charges for such materials not returned when due. To pay all library charges for materials damaged through negligence while in possession of the user of this card. That when information on the face of this card is no longer correct, it is my responsibility to exchange this card for a new one showing correct information. Loss of this card does not cancel the above agreement. Signed, Clem Bertrand. Now, what's interesting is this address of 3100 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, is in fact the same road that David Ferry lived on. And Clay Shaw lived on Dauphine Street. But I believe David Ferry lived in the 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway. So it's in the same roughly block, like real close, which is interesting. I don't know what it means either, but God damn it, it's hella interesting. Just like all kinds of other stuff, that I bring you every week here on the Lone Gunman Podcast. Remember, no new shows will be on YouTube for the foreseeable future until it gets resolved. So, find an auditory stream you like, subscribe, download, listen, follow on all the socials at the Lone Gunman 7. This is your boy. Peace.
When I'm screaming down, no gun was on his head. Mrs. Kennedy cried, "Oh no!"
Don't believe a word that they tell you. The FBI or the CIA. The media and the lies that they tell you. The biggie bit that killed JFK. Yeah, they blew him away. Away. Away.